Welcome to the Knowing Show. I am your host, Christene Marie, and I'm excited tonight to talk about the integration of business and our personal lives. This is one of my very favorite topics, really, the integration of the IQ and the EQ. I haven't touched on this in a while, but one of the core reasons for having this focus is because so much of the time we really only focus on the IQ. We only focus on the left part of our brain, and we leave the other part of it just kind of lying dormant, and we don't engage it, and we don't actually tend to it. And there's something about the tending to something and kind of like the nurturing of it that allows for it to continue to grow and be cultivated and nurtured. And so if we don't ever tend to the EQ and the right side of the brain, we're going to effectively be underdeveloped, and we'll have one part of us that's way ahead than the other, and we can never have equilibrium in the way that we make decisions and the way that we show up in relationships. And so as we talk about relationships this evening, it's so important that we just realize how important it is that we're operating with both parts of our brain turned on. And the brain isn't actually divided in half with a right and left part of our brain, but this concept of us having both as very equal participants in the way that we make decisions and the way that we think and operate as beings is so important to highlight, because it's very it's very under discussed. We don't talk too much about the EQ and how to bring that into the way that we lead, into the way that we make business decisions. The subconscious is a key driver in purchase making decisions among our customers. And that's becoming more widely accepted and more widely agreed upon and respected. And that's changing the way that we do business. But we need to actually have it infiltrate our personal lives as well as our business lives. And so tonight we're going to be talking about the economy of relationship. We have spent so much of our lives, just like how we've been spending so much of our lives cultivating the IQ, that the EQ can be underdeveloped and left behind. We have spent so much of our lives investing in building trust and building relationships with the world around us. How do we win approval? There's books about how to how to win friends and influence people. I haven't read that. I think it's by Dale Carnegie, but I'm not sure. But I heard that's such an incredible book. There's copious others that are all about the horizontal, all about kind of the lateral space around us of how do we get what we want? How do we win people over? How do we actually have real influence, ensure that we're really able to get people to make the right decision? And it's all about how do we show up for everybody else. So we spend the majority of our time, our energy, our resources in the building of relationship with others, that we actually spend far too little time in the cultivation of relationship with ourselves. And so tonight I actually want to turn inward and look in the mirror of, we know the value of building relationships with our customers, but are we actually doing the work to strengthen the kind of relational dynamic among our teams and also among our own personal self? Because when we start doing that, when we actually start allowing for these conversations to take place that are so incredibly important, then we really can start getting to the next level. And y'all, just a little bit more preamble here. We're getting to the point where with AI, our services are all going to start looking very similar to each other. There's going to be very few truly original services because there's so much power to create truly a best-in-class product and best-in-class service and best-in-class offering. So the thing that's going to make us uniquely different is the ability to present ourselves authentically and have something truly unique to and about us that our customers are going to latch onto and thus develop a relationship and thus be able to purchase from us. And then there's loyalty there. So brand has never mattered more, not just the brand of who you are, the personality of the brand, but the mission. Where are you going? What are your values? I got on 2 different new business calls over the last week, and I went through very slowly and very deliberately what our core values are. And I told them, we value these certain things and we hire and fire accordingly, both with our employees and with our clients. And, there was an element of not just respect, but real buy-in. They were excited about the prospect of working together because of our values. And they were asking, how do we do this? How do we keep moving forward? Because the values really serve as a boundary line and a foundation and a protection for us moving forward. And it's kind of like this unspoken contract of, actually, it's not an unspoken contract. It's like an unwritten contract. It's spoken, but we're basically signing up for, we're going to exist within the bounds of this type of relationship with each other. And we're shaking hands on that. We're agreeing that this is what it's going to look like when we operate together. And so if we don't take the time to set the expectation for our customers on what the relationship is going to look like, because every single engagement with clients is a relationship, if we don't take the time to set the expectations on the vision, mission, values, and then obviously all the details around the service, we're missing a key opportunity to establish emotional, emotional currency between them. There's a currency exchange when people actually buy in on an emotional level. I spoke with an individual who's actually the CMO for the fastest growing healthcare company and just company in the US. And he was talking about trust just being such an important KPI for us to be looking at as we head into 2026. And I asked him, what's the metric that you're using to measure trust? And he said they're using customer lifetime value, which I just absolutely loved. I was sitting there thinking, I was like, I wonder, like we don't really talk much about customer lifetime value. We do from a profitability standpoint, but not as a true metric by which you measure the success of your company. And even today, he and I spoke again, and I asked him, what's your buy box when you go in to acquire a business? Customer lifetime value. Y'all, we cannot undervalue the true cost of what the lifetime value of a customer allows for. And the same goes for a lifetime value of some of our friends. We sometimes poo-poo on the past friends that we had in childhood, but y'all, there's something really pure and beautiful about that. I've had some very authentic conversations with other leaders who are navigating, what does friendship look like as I'm evolving and growing, but then and also there's just like these beautiful memories and beautiful people that I really do love. And we hear from other, I don't want to call out names, so I'll just say there's some very loud and present entrepreneurs who are talking about leave everybody behind and be ruthless as you climb to the top. And y'all, it's all a values game. It's all a values question. What are your values for your life? What's your mission? Where do you want to get to? When you look back on your life, what is the type of relational equity that you have built with friends, with family, with customers, and then also with yourself? Who do you want to be at the end of your life? And we cannot theorize that well or better than, in my experience, than writing our own eulogy and writing it in every single one of those regards. In business, what do you want to have done? What do you want to have actually built? What's your asset? What are you handing down? What are you selling? What are you scaling today so that you've got something at the end of your life, something tangible? And then who are you in business? How are you relating with other leaders, at the end of your life? Okay, let's look back and kind of plan from that vantage point. So it's, what have you built? Who are you in that position of leadership? And then really, how did you go about doing it? That's kind of where you get to dream a little bit when it comes to your eulogy at the end of your life. What would be really exciting for the how? And a lot of the how has to be done today as we're actually like kind of figuring out how to make $1 billion, let's say. But there's something really fun about, man, if I could, at the end of my life, how would I have built an empire? How would I have given my family generational wealth? How will I have been the best mother, best father, best partner? How would I do that if I was to really, truly dream? And then move from the business to family, and then move from family to the financial, and then move from financial to health, and then move from health to you. Because y'all, until we start recognizing that we are building relationship every single moment of every single day with every single person and with ourselves, we need to recognize how there could be disparity so that there's consistency in our lives. I was actually working with one of our clients as a psychologist and an executive performance coach, absolutely brilliant human. And I was listening to one of our conversations lately, because what we'll do is we'll have conversations with him and then turn it into social media content. So one of my superpowers is asking questions, and I just love being able to really, really go deep with people. And so sometimes it's for the purpose of breakthrough for them, for me. Sometimes it's for the purpose of creating incredible content that otherwise maybe we wouldn't have really come up with if they had been writing it themselves. And so in one of these conversations, we were talking about, man, just it's so, so, so important to have psychological safety. And if there's not psychological safety with the way that we're leading our team, they're not going to be as creative. They're actually not going to be as free to share and offer up opportunities for a new direction or something original, a new campaign to try. And so if there's not a psychological safety, actually, it's not just that there's a lack of, or not just neutral, we're actually we're operating in the red, because that means that if they don't feel psychological safety, their nervous system is actually operating in the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn state. It could be very subconscious. It could be so subconscious for them that they don't even realize they're doing it. But if they're not feeling safe, there's no neutral line. They're thus feeling unsafe and thus unable to perform, create, and really allow for true performance to match what would be if there was psychological safety. And here's the thing. That same psychological safety that our employees and even clients, colleagues, friends, family might feel with us, we also might feel with our own selves. Y'all, if we are showing up to our time with ourselves and we're kicking ourselves for everything we didn't do perfectly, we're judging, oh my gosh, I can't believe I sent that email. If we're looking with kind of a scorn at you and me, there's no way we're going to ever feel that type of psychological safety with our own selves. And so as we consider the economy of relationships, y'all, it hit me tonight as I was kind of thinking through the topic for this evening. I had a conversation planned for earlier today, and the gentleman never showed. So I'm trusting that this is exactly what we should be talking about tonight. I just had this thought, we don't ever think about the true value of relationship with ourselves. We spend so much of our life, pretty much all of our resources, our emotional capacity, our mental fortitude and energy, giving it away. And there's something that I've seen both in men and women, but honestly, primarily in men, there's something very heroic about having nothing left. There's kind of this pride that they have over having no time, no energy, no space. They're constantly the hero. And I see it in women too. And I think that we all see it in ourselves. I see it in myself. Just yesterday, I realized, oh man, I'm wanting to be the hero in this situation. So it's not a male versus female thing. It's really in every single one of us. It just is the question of how does that manifest? And so once we really start recognizing, man, all right, there's a need for me to not give it all away. There was this moment in my life when I had probably like an awakening, I would say, to this concept of not giving it all away. I was sitting in the very back of a room in Seattle at I think it was a Hyatt hotel. And we were putting on an event for Amazon, my partner and I. And I was sitting in the back, and the keynote speaker was sharing. And she had a glass basin, and she had a glass in her left hand and a pitcher in her right. And she had water in the pitcher. So she held the glass over the basin and started pouring water in the cup. And around halfway, she held it up. She said, most of us give from a cup that's half full. And then she filled it all the way to the top. And then she said, others of us will give from a full glass. And then she poured and poured and poured, and the water just spilled over into the basin. And then she held up the glass and she said, y'all, everything that is within this glass is for you. All the overflow, that's for everyone else. And y'all, it was wild. That's why I like to think of it as an awakening moment, as a breakthrough moment. I just started weeping. I was like, oh my gosh, all of my life I had spent just giving everything away because that is how I found my value. It's like, unless I'm ending the day depleted, I didn't do enough. Unless I ended the day feeling this sense of like overwhelm or a sense of exhaustion, it means that I didn't love hard enough, I didn't do enough, I didn't perform well enough, I wasn't perfect enough. It's all about enough. But here's what's freaking wild. And I didn't even think about this until this moment. So I love this. Y'all, if we're giving from our overflow that's in the basin, we're always going to have enough because it's in the glass. So rather than outsourcing enough to everybody, we're actually able to always have enough. Oh, I love this, y'all. This is so cool. We always have enough if we know how to give from our overflow. And so the only way that we can really do this, and I heard this when I guess it was 2022 when this happened. I'm sitting in the back of this room with Amazon. I'm not supposed to be there, except I got to write all the speeches and I got to write all the content, and it was awesome. But man, I just felt, I was like, that woman just changed my life in a way. It was incredible. Y'all, if we start learning this concept that it is not what we do that gives us our value, but rather who we are, that changes the entire way that we show up in the world. It changes the entire way that we engage in relationships, and it changes the entire way we show up for our customers, our family, especially as we're looking at Thanksgiving and Christmas. My sister and I were talking about that yesterday or 2 days ago. She's hosting Christmas this year. They have zero furniture. They just moved into this beautiful, wonderful house. And it's so overwhelming to think about, okay, I've got to have Thanksgiving ready and Christmas in just 2 weeks. And here's the beauty. And she and I were talking about this. If we change our value system to value being together, not what does it look like? What are you doing for me? What am I doing for you? And the very transaction itself changes to simply the value of being, the value of who rather than the what and the how even. Those come after. The who is at the very nucleus of every healthy, thriving relationship, is that who you are is someone that is loving and worthy of love and of value simply because of who you are. Now, this is where it gets really dicey. And this is a discussion that I frequently disagreed with in my former marriage. I believe that at the end of the day, every single person has intrinsic value. No matter what they do, they have value. Their life has value. And then the question becomes, all right, so then what does radical responsibility look like? I talked about that last night and really dove into what does radical responsibility sound like? What does it feel like? What does it look like? And we really went and got specific about that. So then at what point does what we do really start to matter? Well, what we do has massive ramifications in every area of our lives, because when we consider the belief and the behavior, they're not disparate. So who I am and the core of that, if it's like, man, there's this biblical concept that says you shall know a tree by its fruit. So what I do will be the overflow of everything that is within. So the health of my external manifestation so often speaks to the health of my internal self. And so when we're in a relationship with people, when we're in a business setting, it's the same thing with the business. It's like, okay, if your numbers aren't good, your business probably needs some work. And it also lends to ourselves in relationships. If we're constantly seeing bad fruit in our lives or in someone else's life, it's a question of, I think it might be time to go inward. But if we do not have an intrinsic value of establishing relationship with ourselves, we will end up looking externally to blame others for why we might be manifesting that bad fruit because we're so disconnected from the tree itself. The symbol for knowing, and it's funny, I was thinking about this 2 years ago. For some reason, I get really specific on timelines. I'm like, I know y'all don't care, but I don't know. I think I just really value the truth, so I don't want to go and pick a random date. And I'm like, no, I want to be exact. Y'all, the symbol for knowing, the cover of my book is a tree. And there's something about that, the tree of knowledge. And what knowing represents and the tree of all that is external, all that you can see. And then as you go inward, inside the tree, and then down to beneath the soil and all of the roots and tendrils that come off from there, there's so much visual analogous opportunities to dive into why the inner state of a person, the inner state of a company, a business, a relationship, the inner self, the inner state will always become known at some point or another. And it is far too easy to point the finger and blame why your business, why yourself, why your relationship may not be what you espouse it to be. But this is where the belief and the behavior are so tied together. We shall know a tree by its fruit. We give from the overflow. So if the overflow from what we're giving is incredibly corrupt internally, our overflow and what we give to others will be corroded as well. And here's the dangerous part, is that the external behavior may actually not be so obviously corroded. It may actually be that moment of yesterday where I was going somewhere and I just had this moment of realization, like, oh, I'm showing up and I want to be the savior right now. I'm actually not showing up with truly pure intentions. Like, I actually want to go and rescue, be the savior in this moment. It's all about me right now. They may not have ever known that. This is where radical responsibility is so important, because if we do not take radical responsibility to examine the belief behind the behavior, this is where it can end up going in such damaging and dangerous directions. And so I read this quote tonight, and it was so powerful. I wrote this down a couple years ago. And so I read this and I wanted to share it with you. One of the reasons why it is so important that we're doing the work to establish not a healthy relationship with ourselves, not just any relationship, but a healthy one. Bessel van der Kolk authored the book, The Body Keeps the Score, and it's all about effectively his process of coining the term PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. There was historically no diagnosis for these veterans who were coming back from Vietnam, and people were throwing them in mental institutes because they had no idea what was going on. One moment he was fine, the next he's exploding in rage. And so he talks so much about, in his book, these war veterans who are so triggered and who get so, it's just so devastating and so upset. And he extends it beyond that to a woman who is driving in the car and she gets into a car accident and her son passes away, and the trauma that is retained in her body. That's really the main focus point, is how our bodies physically store trauma. It's not just mental, it's not just emotional, it's physically in our body. And our body will react even though we know that we're not there, but it's all interconnected. And so that's where it's so important that our body, and then also our mind and our emotions, they all feed each other like this big old loop. And so one can trigger the other, and then the other can trigger that one. And so the ability to know and understand and then master all of our intelligences, our intellectual, emotional, physical, and spiritual. The power comes when we're able to master each one. And this is what he says: the greatest sources of our suffering are the lies we tell ourselves. Y'all, this is on the heels of him talking about the trauma that these men incurred during Vietnam. This is on the heels of telling about the mother who had her son die before her eyes in a car accident. He says that the greatest source of our suffering, it's not out there, it's in here. So until we start taking radical responsibility for our minds, our souls, our spirits, our physical bodies, we will constantly be having a disparity between our belief and our behavior. We will constantly be blaming other people and not really understanding what is the core root of our suffering, so long as and until we establish a relationship with ourselves that can really just allow for that intimacy to come back in return, so that we can be giving from a full glass. And then the overflow is what we give to everyone else. Y'all, we love better when we're coming from a healthy place. Now we're able to give without strings attached. Now we're giving not to be the savior, but to actually be able to be what they need, not what we need. If we're giving to others to meet our own needs, there is so much tied to that that is unspoken. It's effectively, and we're entering into an unspoken transaction where the other person isn't privy of the deal that's taking place. So the more we know ourselves, the more we're able to engage in this economy of relationships where we're really free as we give to other people without the expectation of what they will give us in return. And that's when we start being able to really be free from the external sources, and we're able to source from within. And that's when we're able to truly walk in freedom, because otherwise we're looking to them to validate us. We're looking to them to give us the affirmation. We're looking to everyone and everything outside to affirm our worth and our being, when we have the power to do that for ourselves. So one more time, Bessel van der Kolk says, the greatest source of our suffering are the lies we tell ourselves. So my question for you and for me tonight is, what's a lie that you and I are telling ourselves, because we have the freedom we have the opportunity to set ourselves free, should we so choose. But the thing is, and this is where we have to get so honest, sometimes those lies have become so convenient, so easy. It's actually an addiction. I found that I was addicted to my phone. I was addicted to external inputs when I went to Prince Edward Island for 2 weeks and just shut it all off. I felt like I was in withdrawal. And so that's an addiction. Another addiction is to bad news, where we're constantly wanting negative, something to keep us in this kind of perpetual state of angst. That's where, when we are in the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, and we're not able to actually be alone and at peace with ourselves, we're actually addicted to the charge that is the external feeding that survival instinct in us. And so we are the only ones that can move ourselves out of that state. We are the only ones that can actually self-induce peace. And it's a choice. So when we consider, what do I want at the end of my life? Who do I want to be? It's so important that we consider, all right, I'm saying that, but am I actually choosing the beliefs and the behaviors necessary to allow for those things to start becoming true in my life? So with that,